Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming, and hey, just one more tier list look at Baldurs Gate 3. With the recent surge of players returning to the game, or new players post-Christmas, there's been a lot of talk around builds, classes and subclasses going on. I made an initial class-based tier list video, and there was a lot of talk about specific subclasses in the comments of that, for honor mode specifically. Today then I've got that follow-up video all about the subclasses, and as you can see here we have S, A, B and C as well as D now, since some subclasses just aren't all that great, or just are not that relevant for a challenge run like honor mode. So I've got a lot to talk about, and I'm going to try and make this video as short and concise as possible. So on some of these I'm going to be pretty straightforward. As a reminder though, this is entirely subjective based on my knowledge and experience, as well as research and a good amount of discussion. So I don't believe this to be fact or perfectly accurate, just my current best representation. Any of the subclasses can deal with honor mode, it's just some are better than others. With all that said though, let's follow the ordering here class by class, starting with Monk it looks like. Now unfortunately we have two in the Way of the Four Elements and the Way of the Shadow are just overclassed by the other one. Four Elements is working much the same but worse than say Open Hand. It's hard to recommend it in good faith outside of the cool and fun nature of it, and I think a lot of people know this. On the other hand, with Way of the Shadow, I just think it has a hard time during the leveling. It's pretty damn decent at endgame once things get really built up, but then every other class and build is. It requires that obscured playstyle which is fun and unique, but like inflicting an extra challenge on yourself in the first days of the playthrough. Both of them are fine, but it's just nowhere near as good as Way of the Open Hand Monk, which is S tier. With how busted this one is, especially when combined with Tavern Brawler, you can have high strength and dex and other main stats that are causing massive damage, while striking many times a turn. Often incredibly multi-class with Thief though for that extra bonus action, allowing for constant flurry of blow use, which is insanely strong. It's probably one of the most well-known strong subclasses in the game. Compared to Four Elements or Way of Shadow, it's just quite the stark difference. Which cannot be said the same for Paladin, which is our next class here. I would say Devotion is generally the weakest of the bunch, but it's still solid and that's why it's in C. Devotion's pretty invasive on the gameplay though, because it's a hard oath to actually maintain when dealing with your conversations and such, and it doesn't really bring nearly as much to the table as the other subclasses. So above that at B, I put Oath of Vengeance, and this is the subclass I ran in my first playthrough. A neat oath concept that fits my vibe of Paladin, with a few spells that are going to help you focus down specific targets. The issue here is a lot of those spells that you get from it are actually concentration based, and that's pretty involved for a Paladin already. So above that, I have both Oath of Ancients and Oathbreaker at the top in S tier. I absolutely love Paladin. I think it's one of the strongest classes and multi-class options you can run, even in honor mode. And these two represent the class in a really good way. If we look at Oathbreaker in particular, this is kind of the DPS focused one. Outside of its cool playstyle and theme, it's that aura of hate that really is standout. It causes extra damage with melee weapons based on your charisma modifier, like the ultimate choice for DPS Paladin. The class also provides some nice spells on top and causes fears for advantage and so on. On the other hand, you have Ancients, which is a brilliant defensive option, and my go-to pick for a Paladin that's more supportive and survival based. The aura of warding is so good, providing resistance to you and nearby allies against spells, essentially cutting offensive spell damage in half against you and the team. So Paladin overall is fantastic, but Oathbreaker and Ancients provide you the best two options for the two main playstyles, whether that's offensive or defensive. Okay, next up looks like we've got Barbarian. We can cut to the point with Wild Magic and just put that down in D. Just a bit invasive on your gameplay with the random nature of it, especially on your bonus action economy, which could be wasted because of this subclass in a not so ideal or planned way. Could be actually quite effective early, but it's just not ideal for honor mode. Meanwhile, much better than that, you have Wild Heart, which I put in A tier. Super helpful and a great pick in honor mode in general. The Bear Heart's probably the most popular of the heart options, which turns your rage into that ultimate resistance option. You get resistance to nearly every damage type except for psychic, leading to a fantastic frontliner that's just very tanky, while also being a great damage dealer at the same time. On the other hand, we have Berserker, which is also A tier for sure, working more as a damage focused version and is actually my top pick for a throwing build. You see, Tavern Brawler provides extra damage on your throws via strength modifier, so perfect, and then you get Frenzied Rage from Berserker, which leads to Enraged Throw. That's a bonus action throw with extra damage on said throw throw, it's very good. Outside of that silliness, it's just a good damage dealer option, just less defensive, and either will work great in honor mode, much like the Paladin ones we just talked about. Okay, looks like Bard is up next, which has great subclasses overall, and is always good in any party, especially as a party face. That cannot be understated. Of the three, I think College of Valor is the least picked, least relevant one. It's more of a supportive version, and quite comparable to the Swords Bard, which is a bit better. If you want a melee support, I do think it's a reasonable pick. I just think there's better options for that kind of a supportive nature. College of Swords, on the other hand, I absolutely love. I put it all the way into S tier because of the incredible flourish attacks, providing tons of utility in DPS. Whether you're going melee or range mode, this is a really good pick. Slashing flourish is obviously the best choice, whether you're cleaving in melee or double attacking the same target with one action in ranged, which is really good for the dual hand crossbow stuff. A ton of builds involve the College of Sword in the concept, and if you're looking for a sort of fighting focused bard, it's just the obvious pick. Whereas a lot of people also swear by, and I kind of do too, College of Law as essentially the awesome spellcasting version of bard. Through magical secrets that you get, you can basically snipe some of the best spells in the game despite being a bard, not like a sorcerer or wizard or whatever. And you're going to be proficient in most things, which is very useful. So you could go College of Law for a more supportive focus, or damage focus, or a mix of both. You can kind of do it all, and because you've got incredible caster spell slots from being a bard, you have lots of ability. I think it's well known that Swords and Law Bard are just top tier. Okay, next up we have Fighter, which has a reasonable roster of subclasses, but one stands out above the rest, much like Monk. First up then, let's talk Champion, which I'm putting into C tier. A pretty straightforward concept. You immediately upon getting the subclass, you're just more likely to get crits because they reduce the number required, say 20 down to 19, on your rolls. General opinion is this is nice and helpful, but it's not that impactful compared to say what you get from Battlemaster. Champion seems to be picked more as an afterthought that fits into a build that doesn't want more busyness. And obviously if you're super crit focusing on a build, it could be a good pick. But beyond that, it's a bit niche. And speaking of niche, we have Eldritch Knight in B. You can kind of make Eldritch Knights by using other classes in multiclass, but there is something very strong about the actual Eldritch Knight. It's buffs, like the spell Shield and Mirror Image and Blur. You can use these things to give yourself really high effective AC while basically being a mage killer. You can be very good for controlling a fight while being very survivable yourself. So yeah, unique playstyle, but again a bit niche. The same definitely can't be said for Battlemaster, which is absolutely S tier. The battle maneuvers that you get are incredible. You get so many options, from making your attacks more accurate to helping your allies and buffing them, managing enemies with fear, prones, maybe disarming them. A 12 out of 12 full Battlemaster fighter is a very good single class focus. But because you get the maneuvers at just level 3, it's actually also a fantastic 3-level dip multi-class option, and so you see it in a lot of builds for that reason. Because there's loads of different maneuvers for different playstyles, it works in so many cases. And then you're also going to get action surge and a fighting style while you're at it. So while the other two subclasses certainly have their place in certain specific builds, Battlemaster is the universal king of fighter. Alright, next up we have Cleric, which has the massive host of subclasses, so I'm going to be really quick with this. Cleric is always going to be useful, so let's really focus on subclass stuff specifically. Firstly, we have Trickery Domain, which is the worst one in my opinion. Also niche in its playstyle, providing much less utility and options of impact rather than the other domains. I'm just not a fan of this one. Above that, B, I'm going to put Nature Domain, which is kind of like a druidy cleric. The biggest thing here, I think, is dampen elements that you get for you and the team, using a reaction to half the damage of acid, cold, fire, lightning, and thunder damage. You also get a selection of druid style spells like Bark Skin, Grasping Veins. It is a neat version of Cleric, but also one that I don't think is the strongest either. Which brings us to the A tier options. We have Knowledge, War Domain, and Light Domain. Knowledge is great for control and proficiencies if you're lacking a good party face and you want to play a cleric. War, on the other hand, is a very good combat-focused cleric. You get things like Guided Strike, that's a +10 bonus to attack rolls. And when you get War God's Blessings, this means you can give that effect to allies too. So if you've got someone that really needs accuracy, doesn't want to miss, maybe like a Gloomstalker Assassin type, that could be very helpful. And for the cleric itself, you've got War Priest. You can make an attack a bonus action, leading to do, you know, lots of attacks per turn, that can be a good multi-class dip, so I do like War Domain a lot. Light is also very high rated, that Fire Cleric. Warding Flare becomes a really impactful thing on your gameplay. It forces enemies to have disadvantage on their attacks, which could be big if they're about to hit hard and you cause them to miss. It's also quite an offensive cleric in its spell focuses too, but since I like to run my clerics more as a support, I don't really find myself using light, even though I know it's very high rated. For me, I rate Tempest Domain and Life Domain higher than that. Life in particular is incredible as the ultimate healer and support. I cover this in a top tier build for an honor mode party because it's so good at preventing deaths en masse, and if you want a healer, it's pretty much just the best option you can go for. On the other hand, we have Tempest Domain there, which provides destructive wrath, so your thunder and lightning attacks can be guaranteed to deal them max damage using a channeled divinity, and you can get up to 3 with the right setup. That is busted. The Tempest Storm Cleric Sorcerer multiclass is a well-known one for its unbelievable burst tied to the destructive wrath concept. If you make enemies wet, they'll be vulnerable to the same damage type, so even higher burst. The Tempest Cleric can help set up huge damage, or just be a very good multi-class dip depending on the damage types in your party. Where it's relevant, it's absolutely dominating. Okay, so next we have Druid, which to be honest with you is not my favorite class concept. I've played it probably the least out of all of them. Through research and conversation, I think I've got a good general idea on these subclasses, but please take this one with a bit more of a grain of salt. So I've got Circle of Land in B. It's kind of the generic caster Druid, one that's scaling with wisdom compared to say charisma or intelligence. And if you're lacking a caster in the party, it's a fine option to consider, but I think you're picking it because you like druids, not because it's the best thing for honor mode. It's not bad, but there's just things that do similar better. Above that, we have Circle of Moon and Spores in A. For Moon, that's the one that's all about transformations, which is very iconic for druid. You can use a spell on a main action and transform on your bonus action, so you can have a very effective single turn. This can lead to being a very good frontliner and one that scales pretty well as you get, say, Owl Bear form later on. But in terms of, say, frontlining or being a spellcaster, I just feel that it does everything pretty well, but if you want to focus on any one thing, like having a better frontliner, you'll find it elsewhere. While Spores is a weird one, the Druid Necromancer, and it's commonly said that it's maybe the better Necromancer option, and most often when in multiclass with Necromancer Wizard. You get this pack of mobs that you control, which you can use to buffer and get in the way or sacrifice at will. That's a very useful thing. You can do some funky things like a melee fighting version though, but like I said, it's not my thing. I don't see it as one of the strongest things in the game, just a very good one. But here's one class that I've mainly played in one subclass, the Ranger. So let's get to the chase on this one. S tier for me is Gloom Stalker. Incredibly good, and we probably all know this. It's that ability to deal so much damage on an initial turn to such a high degree that you can kill a lot of enemies before they even get to react. You can go invisible or just leave, and then come back and do the next first turn kill, and then leave again, and come back and do it again. It's funny because if you plan to go Assassin, you're probably actually a Gloom Stalker Ranger with a little bit of Assassin, which is a bit sad. And there's the incredible damage you can do with the dual hand crossbow builds, or even just full on proper bow. Below that, I put in B, Beastmaster and Hunter. I spoke recently about the Hunter and how this can be really powerful in the late game once you get volley going. Absolutely dominating fights with insane DPS potential, AoEing 4 or even 5 times a turn, which can be insane. The problem is you need to be level 11 for that. You might as well play something else and then respec to Hunter very late, which is a big issue, bit awkward, and that's why it's in B. On the other hand, I've also got Beastmaster at B right, and I'm pretty uneducated on this topic. The beasts you can summon seem pretty useful, walling enemies, sacrificing them if you need to, quite useful in the abilities they have. I just don't see this one talked about that much, and while it's certainly not weak, I think B should probably be a reasonable place for it. Those of you more versed on this subclass though, maybe you can rate this more accurately in the comments. Next up then we have Sorcerer. Straight to the point on this one. I have Draconic Bloodline in A and Storm Sorcerer in S. Bloodline is fantastic for the many different focuses you get, whether that's extra damage on certain damage types you're planning on doing, or resistances to those too. That can be clutch, as well as the extra health as you level the class more and more. I generally like Bloodline for early to mid Sorcerer leveling though, or just a neat multi-class dip, while Storm Sorcerer provides the more mid to late game real power with much higher highs, because the thunder or lightning damage potential is really high, especially if you dip into Tempest Cleric. You just get so much burst and control through, say, your cold spells, while hitting ultra hard with your lightning, especially if you make enemies wet beforehand. Also, you're just going to get some free flying around, which can be fantastic for positioning. And yeah, as a sorcerer, you got lots of spell options, the twin haste and stuff like that can be very impactful. I just find both of these pretty damn top tier, but prefer Storm Sorcerer above Draconic Bloodline. Lower down the list though at C is Wild Magic, which just just is unreliable. You might be super powerful one moment, the other you might fuck everything up. It's pretty damn chaotic, and that's a fun thing, just dangerous to pick in honor mode. After that, we have Warlock, which is a class concept I really like, but let's really focus on the subclasses. I feel of the three here, Archfey is the one I'd rank the lowest, but I still put it pretty high at a B rating. It's basically the CC option of the subclasses, fearing, charming enemies, dominating targets, preventing invisibility. I just think the other two subclasses provide a bit more impact, and you can get control for the other subclass either way. So at A tier, I have the Fiend and I have the Great Old One. The Fiend is a more survivable Warlock, which is a very good thing in honor mode. You get lots of temporary hit points, though admittedly there's a lot of ways to get those in this game, and Fiendish Resilience later on, which lets you pick a damage type and become resistant to it. You basically choose a damage type to resist per short rest. So every fight you can prepare what you're going to deal with and become very survivable tanky against it, which is really good if you're scouting things out. So as a survival Warlock option in honor mode, I think it's a very good pick. Meanwhile, we have the Great Old One, which is a good mix of damage and CC. That core passive, Mortal Reminder, means you can fear enemies, which gives you advantage in a fight. But there's lots of other ways you get advantage. Through Entropic Ward, you force disadvantage on an enemy that's attacking you, spending a reaction to do so. If they miss, well then you get advantage on them on your next attack roll. So that's very clutch too. Honestly, both of these subclasses could be considered for S tier, but I just lost the same level of enthusiasm for this in honor mode specifically, because Pact to the Blade, level 5 you get Deepened Pact, providing you with the sort of extra attack. That used to stack with normal extra attacks, which was kind of busted for, say, multi-class dipping 5 levels into Warlock. Since that doesn't work in honor mode, it's a big blow for the potential of the class, and so I feel it's probably better placed in A than S. Nearly at the end though, we're going to be talking about Rogue, which is going to be pretty quick. I rated this one the lowest as a class overall in my class tier list, and maybe you'll see why. Starting with the Arcane Trickster, which I put in D rating. Illusions just aren't great in Baldurs Gate 3. In D&D, the potential is really high and really fun, but in this video game, it's way more restricted, just nowhere near as good. Above that, we have Assassin in B tier. It brings a lot to the table from just 3 levels, but like I said earlier, if you're playing a sort of Assassin playstyle, well, you're probably playing Gloomstalker Ranger mostly with a little bit of Assassin. 3 levels into Assassin gets you the critical benefits you're looking for, and more than that just isn't that great. Best used in multiclass, so I just can't put it higher than B. And speaking of 3 levels, we have the Thief, which I do put in A. A lot of multiclass builds work in Thief because of that incredible second bonus action that this provides. Open Hand Monk gets a ton from that, but any dual wielding build is going to use offhand attacks with bonus actions, so it's great there. But yeah, many meta builds actually work in Thief. You're not really playing Thief to its full though, you're just dipping in 3 levels for the multiclass, because more than that just doesn't feel that great. So a very good multiclass option, but Rogue's just in a weird place overall. But as you can see, this brings us to the last class for the video, and one with tons of subclasses, so let's fly through this. Right off the bat then, we have Enchantment, Conjuration, Illusion, and Transmutation, all down in D tier, specifically for honor mode though. They all serve interesting purposes, but they're not going to provide what you need in a challenge run. But things like Transmutation can be helpful, where you return to camp, get your hireling that's in a specific one of these specs, like an alchemist you can rely on, use it and then swap it back out. Other subclasses are going to be way more impactful. So in B tier, I have Necromancy. Like I said earlier, overshadowed by the Spore Druid, that does much the same thing, but kind of better. Necromancer was originally busted though, thanks to the Dance Macabre spell. After that was nerfed, it kind of lost that busted potential. Now it's just a fine, fun and unique playstyle. Above that in A, we have the Evocation School. It's like the easiest wizard to play. Benefits like your AoEs won't harm allies, and the fact that you get potent cantrips, making them very likely to land, or if they're not going to land, it just still does half damage. And there's Empowered Evocation that adds your intelligence modifier to damage rolls using evocation spells. Pretty potent damage potential there. It's a very straightforward and very reliable pick, and if you're a new player, it's probably the best thing you could go for. But in terms of honor mode and effectiveness, we have Abjuration and Divination in S tier. Abjuration leads to essentially the most survivable wizard that exists, and you can extend that survivability to your allies too. You create this kind of comical build that nullifies damage or massively reduces it by stacking up arcane wards by using the subclass's type of spells. When you stack that high enough, you can reduce 10s or even 20s of damage, meaning you don't even take damage when you're hit. You build this tanky reflect style build that works wonders and could be a very reliable pick for honor mode specifically. Like I said, you can also reduce the damage your allies are taking at the same time by projecting that ward. But on the other hand, if you're thinking more of a normal wizard, Wizard, a lot of people swear by divination, and for good reason. You unlock the portent dice, allowing you to change the rolls on different results, meaning you just failed a CC on a target, right? You can just decide you didn't fail. You store up these rolls after resting and then use them where relevant, leading to consistent control of how fights go. Amazingly, that works on enemies too. So if you've got a low roll saved, you can just force that upon the enemy, meaning they roll low on an attack where they normally were going to hit, and now they just missed or something. So either Abjuration or Divination, I think, are your best picks for Wizard in Honor Mode specifically. But there you have it. That's my overview of the subclasses with Honor Mode specifically in mind. Overall, I'm pretty happy with these ratings and the reasoning. There's only a couple that I felt unsure about. I hope this was an interesting watch and hopefully useful, but remember not to take this list as fact. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of discussion in the comments about what, where, and when. For now though, I've been Hollow, you've been you, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.